This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
Sure, it's like waking up and your feet hit the floor and you're like, okay, today I'm going to co-parent with my ex in a way that's respectful and responsible. Understanding too that you're going to fall off the wagon, but that's okay. The formula parts that we're discussing today are great tools to get started or great tools to use to get back on track.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Balogh, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive. This week, we're joined by Kari Clemmer, and we're talking about how to achieve successful co-parenting. Kari has developed a simple but very effective path to accomplish this called the 4 formula parts. Kari is a certified family mediator, co-parenting education instructor, co-parenting coach, and the owner of the Mediation Room. She also wrote the co-parenting workshop, a court-approved co-parenting class. Kari Clemmer, thank you for joining me.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you finally on. I've been waiting for this day. Tell us more about you.
So I live in Murphy, Texas, and most of the work I do is out of Dallas, but I'm a family law mediator. I am author and instructor of the co-parenting workshop, which is how we met. And I also have a Facebook page called Co-Parenting Basics and write a newspaper column called Co-Parenting Basics. It's a weekly column, and everything that I do is co-parenting, all geared towards the help and success of co-parenting, or at least trying to reach that goal of respectful and responsible co-parenting. So that's what I do.
I love our topic today because so often I've seen co-parents at a loss of how to respond or deal with situations that come up in co-parenting. And the 4 formula parts make it easy to understand an effective, peaceful path. Can we take them one at a time?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. So what's the first formula part?
Start with number 1. Make a choice. Make a choice every day to co-parent respectfully and responsibly. And that sometimes seems like very easy to hear if you see it on paper, easy to read, but it's really hard to apply when you're talking about being in the middle of something that's very difficult, which is separation and divorce and trying to redefine relationships. You know, you were together, now you're not. And so making a choice to co-parent is key. Just making a choice to co-parent respectfully and responsibly, however that looks, whatever that looks like.
Is it like setting a daily intention?
Sure. It's like waking up and your feet hit the floor and you're like, okay, today I'm going to co-parent with my ex in a way that's respectful and responsible. Understanding too that you're going to fall off the wagon, but that's okay. The formula parts that we're discussing today are great tools to get started or great tools to use to get back on track. If, a lot of people, like you said, they're just lost at what to do. And this is a way for them, a tool for them to use. Very simple, 4 formula parts to try to apply to every situation in their co-parenting. And making choice is the first one. I mean, you just have to make a choice that this is what you're going to do because it's best for your kids.
So just dissecting number 1, I was wondering, like respectfully, what does it mean?
So in the context of this particular formula part, it would be knowing that yelling, screaming, and hollering at your ex in front of your children is probably not respectful. And probably not the example that you want to be setting. So any of those things that, aren't what you would consider respectful, if you're being ugly, people know if what they're about to do has an intent behind it, an agenda, a level of disrespect, and something that's not right. So that's kind of what that means.
Right. And also you had said if yelling and screaming in front of your kids is not respectful. And some people actually need to hear that and be like, yeah, it is not respectful. But also to take it a step further, even messages, even when you're alone with your co-parent, there's a way to communicate, right, that is respectful and not hurtful,
Yeah. And I think when, especially at the onset of separation and divorce, it's very hard to figure out what this is going to look like for 2 people who have now made a decision to no longer be together. What is that relationship going to look like? Well, at the onset, it's looking pretty ugly because one or the other is not happy, with circumstance. And so anger and emotion become attached to all of that. And I say in my workshop, so much of what goes wrong in co-parenting is anger and emotion driven. Mm-hmm. And that's why this particular formula part is so important to just keep in mind. These are all tried and true. This is how I reached my goal of respectful and responsible co-parenting, which I consider, and my ex as well, flawless. We co-parented in a flawless way. It was effortless. It was flawless. But these are the things that we did. When I decided to write the workshop, that's kind of what I did. I had to take a look at what did he and I actually do that made it work. And these were the things that we did. And people don't have time now to do a lot of work. And so these really are not a lot of work, but they're hard because they're in the middle of something very difficult.
Right. Very emotional.
Yes.
So the other part of number 1, right? Make a choice every day to co-parent respectfully and responsibly. So what would you say responsible co-parenting is then?
I think all of it. I think anything that you're doing that is not setting an example or not allowing kids to see that, even though we've made a choice to no longer be together, normalcy can still exist. And we don't have to be malicious. We don't want to show our kids that we're being malicious to someone, who's the other parent. And I think too, ultimately, I honestly believe that both parents want the same thing for their kids. I don't believe that they want kids in the middle of high conflict. That's what happens, but I don't think that's what people set out to do. Again, I think anger and emotion attached to circumstance is what causes a downfall in co-parenting, and people don't know how to pick up the pieces once they let all that anger and emotion, enter in. And I'm all about making sure that there's a plan, an expectation, a standard being set at the onset. That's kind of hard, again, because it's something difficult. But responsible is not doing things that are going to affect the kids in a negative way that could end up being long lasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you combine the respectful and the responsible. It made me think a lot about this first one. There's a lot there because of those words. They hold a lot for me. And I think, also being responsible, I feel like, is doing your part, like, showing up for parenting time, and discussing difficult topics. If that's the relationship you have, you may be parallel parenting with your co-parent, and maybe that's not what you do. But for instance, I remember this was a mistake I made, right? Like we all make mistakes. And then hopefully the next day you set the intention again to like recenter and be better. But
sure.
One mistake I made was trying to have a conversation at exchanges. Because that was the only time that I felt like I had an opportunity to discuss important topics. Like we weren't really communicating at any other time. Like there was no opportunity to talk. And so that was a mistake. I should have just not done that. And maybe we just never had the conversation, but it just wasn't right to put him on guard during exchanges. And it added that element of conflict that just shouldn't have been there. But on the flip side, I felt like, it was our responsibility to address some of these concerns that were coming up. Don't have the conversation when you're having an exchange with the children, right? But pick another time where you can. That was the responsible side of it.
Exactly. And the other thing too is a lot of people don't realize that drop off and pickup is the number one opportunity for upset. It's the number one opportunity for there to be, some kind of, like you said, an exchange that doesn't go so well, but the kids are there. So whatever you're doing, they're going to witness, and the hope is to try to get drop off and pick up. It's the number one opportunity to bring in stress and tension for the kids as well. So drop off and pick up, it being the number one opportunity for that all to happen. It's the number one thing that needs to be addressed at the onset of separation divorce. Once a decision is made to separate or divorce, that's the first thing that happens. You automatically have drop off and pick up because you're going to be visiting your kids.
Yeah.
And how that looks is going to be really important,
Yeah. Like what would happen was it'd be like, all right, if you don't want to talk about it now, let's set another time when we can. And then the response was, okay, well, message me and we'll get together. And then I would message and I would never hear back. So it was a tough one.
But that's the cool thing about coaching. That's the really cool thing about coaching. If you're not able to do that together and or alone together, reaching out to a third party neutral that can help facilitate that conversation. That's why I love co-parent coaching, because that's what it does. It allows people to come in, put on the table what the issues are that are getting in the way of their being able to co-parent effectively and respectfully and responsibly, and then being able to address it, even though some of those things are hard to hear that might be being brought up, addressing those issues and being able to leave that room with those resolved somewhat and being able to move on then. Okay, we've addressed this, we're going to fix this, and now we're going to move on.
So number 2, can you tell me what the second formula part is?
So set aside your differences. Set aside your differences to do number 1. You need to set aside your differences to be able to make a choice to co-parent respectfully and responsibly, but set aside your differences. And obviously, in the middle of separation and divorce, there's a lot of differences, a lot of things that are not agreed on, about the divorce process, obviously about custody, visitation schedules, child support, all those things that get in the way, all those things that are in the middle of the legalities of separation and divorce. So setting aside your differences. And this is one that's kind of difficult for some to understand. It doesn't mean, and I'm going to say this because I did have two, both actually a couple, and they took their workshops apart from each other, but both said the exact same thing. They were not going to set aside their differences. They misunderstood what that was supposed to mean, in that it doesn't mean forget what happened. You're probably never going to forget if you have something, whether you were wronged or infidelity or abuse, whatever those things are. Those are things that are going to be hard to forget. But if you can set it aside for the sake of this co-parenting journey that you're going to be on, maybe even add a level of forgiveness to it, just so that it doesn't get in the way of co-parenting. It happened. Maybe whatever happened shouldn't have happened, but you have to move it aside so that you can co-parent with this person. No matter what happened, you still have to be encouraging healthy relationship between the other parent and the kids. And so that's what that means.
So I'm guessing it doesn't necessarily include like safety issues that might come up that you see happening with the kids.
No, and that stuff gets addressed. I mean, most people that I see do have attorneys. There's a few that don't have attorneys, but most do. And those kind of things, I just have to say and encourage, let the process take care of it. If you have something, then report to your attorney, and your attorney will take care of it through the legal process. But if people try to take care of it on their own, that's not going to go so well.
Sometimes it doesn't, right? It just creates more conflict, for sure. So,
yeah.
So for this one, where does picking your battles fit in here?
That's a good question, but that's formula part number 3, probably. You know what I mean? Like picking your battles, and that's a good one to add to number 3, which is always do the right thing, even if your ex isn't. You do have to pick your battles. You do have to pick what things are most important. And obviously, when you're talking about co-parenting, it has to be with the thought process behind a best interest of children. Whatever that is, however that is, those kind of discussions, talks, battles, they don't have to be battles. They can be healthy discussions. But if I totally encourage people who aren't able to have those healthy discussions to seek a third party neutral to help them. Maybe even a family member. It doesn't have to be a professional, maybe a family member, just to help them. But yeah, picking your battles as another one. There's some that you can let go and some that maybe you can't.
Right. That is a tough one, because you don't want to be fixated on the little things, and then the conflict just continues and continues, and then you really do need to have the insight to be able to identify those serious issues that are worthwhile to discuss more deeply, even if it does lead to a conflict and it does need to be resolved.
Yeah, the battles that are in the way of effective co-parenting, and the battles that are in the way of the kids, not feeling stressed and not feeling tension between mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad. Those are the things that have to be addressed, but they have to be addressed in a healthy way. And if they make the responsible decision or that they cannot have the conversation together alone or through an app such as yours or anything like that, then they have to seek outside help to get it forward, because the ultimate goal is trying to co-parent in a way that's going to have the least amount of upset on the kids, and picking the battles and making sure that everything's being done in a way that's going to not affect them is what has to happen.
Yeah. So can I share with you an example that I feel like, I'm not sure if it fits in here or not, but so recently I had this issue of setting my own boundaries with my co-parent, and it actually it went against the best interest of the children. At least that's what I thought. I had this dilemma essentially. So let me tell you. So my co-parent couldn't come pick up the children recently for his parenting time because his car was broken down. And I messaged him back and said, let me know if you want me to drop them off for you. I need to know by 5 p.m. Otherwise, I need to plan for childcare because I had work that day and I needed to make arrangements. I didn't hear from him till later, and I had already made childcare arrangements.
So it was after 5.
It was after 5 because that was my limit. I was like, and I have to do that, or I'll never hear. And then I'm hanging in the balance. So it was after the deadline. So I finally heard from him. And here I was in this dilemma. I'm like, okay, it's the best interest of the children is that they're with him and they wanted to be with him and they love him and he wants to be with them. And it was like, oh gosh, I'm in this dilemma. But my boundary and my limitation. And it was like, what do I do now? Well, what I ended up doing was saying, sorry, the deadline was passed. I've made arrangements. I'm not going to break them. We moved forward. It was very upsetting to him that I did that. So it's like these little things that come up and sometimes it's so hard to know what to do.
So coming from a co-parenting standpoint, and that's not the first time I've heard that issue. Actually, I just heard this recently in one of my workshops. So you're not alone, for one. But if you're talking about setting boundaries, again, I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of answers and ideas. And some of what I share comes from the history of the workshop and seeing what has worked and what hasn't worked for people that share. And in your situation, that is exactly what they have done that has worked in setting boundaries. And that is say what you mean and mean what you say. It's just like setting a boundary for phone calls. If you say, the new routine is bed at 8:30, so your calls are going to have to come before 8:30. And then they call at 8:45 and you let them have the call, you're taking 10 steps forwards and 40 steps backwards. And so it's say what you mean what you say. And eventually, I personally think that eventually when they realize, oh, she said I need to do by 5 o'clock. And the last time I missed my visitation schedule, that's not your fault. You know what I mean? That's not your fault. He could have very easily messaged you back in a timely manner and there would have been no issue. But I'm all about setting boundaries because a lot of people in co-parenting, that is one of the complaints. Like, how do I do this? What boundary can I set for this? Communication obviously is the number one complaint. And so for me, I just say you have to set a boundary about communication being about the kids, not things personal. And I get that a lot in my coaching sessions, where one or the other will want to talk about something has nothing to do with co-parenting, nothing to do with the kids. And I'm not there to handle the legalities. That's why you have an attorney. So yeah, that's very common what you're talking about, your situation. I think you've handled it well. And I believe that is a great way to stop that kind of thing happening.
Right.
And maybe this is a one-time isolated incident, but the history and past in the workshop, that's not the case. Yeah. That's not the case. Yeah. It'll happen again.
Yeah. And I like what you say though. You have to be consistent and then eventually it does get better. And really it is the kind of the long game that you're focused on when you set that boundary. It's not that specific parenting time the next day. It's really for the long term with this person.
Sometimes it's for people that maybe have an agenda and an intent. So if that's the case, those are the kind of boundaries that once you set them, especially the say what you mean and mean what you say, and following through is key to being able to kind of squash the agenda and intent if it's ill. So that's why I just encourage that, for people who are having difficulty, they'll see the dynamic change. I personally think it's short order if they're, relinquishing visitation because of their decisions, their choice. So, yeah.
Right. So 3, always do the right thing. Just to reiterate, even if your ex isn't. I've been thinking about this one a lot lately. And, I've been considering writing a blog called The Case for Robot Co-Parenting because sometimes it feels like you don't want to be reactive. Like your choices they shouldn't be based on what the other person is doing. Have nothing to do with that. It's almost like you have to completely cut all that out and just focus on what's the best interest of the child. And sometimes it's really hard to do.
It really is hard to do. And it's funny because when I go over these in the workshop, or even a coaching session. When you're talking about that one, I've had people say, and one lady in particular that I'm thinking of, she say, well, what if he does la, la, la? And I said, refer to number one. And she was just look at it and go, oh, okay. Well, what if he does blah, blah, blah? We'll refer to number three. It's like really for honest, real, these four formula parts, if they can be applied, or people will try to apply them to every single situation that comes up in their co-parenting, applying them makes it work. It's the craziest thing, but it really does. You know, when you're talking about your kids are seeing the example you're setting. So in co-parenting, you're trying to set an example that, again, normalcy can exist. Our relationship doesn't have to be mean and ugly and malicious and, have all the ugly stuff attached to it. Our co-parenting can be in a way that does not exhibit poor behavior from us for our children. And I think ultimately that's the thing. But I think applying all of them to different situations, they work. Again, tried and true.
I totally agree with you. I loved them when I first saw the four formula parts. I'm like, gosh, this covers everything. Like you could just look down at this and take every situation, and then
Mhm.
you could see the path to what you could needed to do.
Yeah.
So I do feel like, number three is a tough one, because when you're angry and you have all these emotions, like you mentioned, it's so high in
Mhm.
emotions that sometimes it's so hard to cut that out. I thought about this when I'm like, hey, if you need to get therapy so that you can do number three, like do what you need to do for yourself so that you can
Yeah.
show up like with number one.
Yeah. This is the hardest one of all four. Obviously, this is the hardest one, but it's the one that's probably going to make the real kicker difference in your co-parenting journey. This is a great example. People who send their children home with something mean, like as an example, I had a lady take the workshop and she said her 8-year-old son came home from a visit with dad, and her 8-year-old son said, Daddy said you had an affair. How do you respond to that? Kids do come home with negative things. And obviously, I'm not a counselor, so I can't counsel her on how to handle that. But coming from a co parenting standpoint and educating people on how to respectfully and responsibly co parent, even setting boundaries, I said to her, you've got to redirect, redirect. You don't want that negativity of what daddy said to him in his head. Remove the negativity that he received from the other parent. And for her, in my workshop, I challenge everybody, think of something that you can say to or in front of your child positive about the other parent. And for her, I said, let's use grilling as an example. Maybe your ex was great at grilling hamburgers. And so you say to son, hey, let's grill hamburgers tonight, buddy. Let's see if we can make them as good as daddy. And then you cook these hamburgers and maybe they are better, but you say to him, nope, daddy's still the grill master. When son goes back to dad and dad says, what'd mom say about me? Son says, mommy said you're still the grill master, daddy. And it just kind of squashes the negativity or the agenda of the other parent if that's what they are doing. If there is ill intent and said, there's nothing positive going to come from dad saying something like that. Nothing positive is going to come from that. But the other parent has to follow number three, always do the right thing, even if the ex isn't. And so redirecting is a great way to do that. Planting those seeds of positivity. I do have people that say, I have nothing positive to say about my ex, and I say, well, you're going to be with me for 4 hours. So let's see if you change your mind, and 9 times out of 10, they really do come up with something. I've had people say, I've got nothing, and come up with, a dad saying, maybe I could be brushing her hair and getting her ready for school and tell her you have mommy's beautiful hair. And I said, that's what I'm talking about. Just simple seeds. I call them simple seeds. And 2 weeks ago, I had a lady say, I don't have anything. And I said, okay. But then a little bit later, she said, I realize now that I've been a very selfish co-parent. So whatever somebody can identify with, when you give them a challenge, they have to dig deep. They have to dig really deep,
Mhm.
because they're in the middle of something with someone that is no longer a part of their everyday life, and someone that they don't care for, and someone they don't respect anymore.
It's tough with co-parenting. You have to keep dealing with this person. And
Mhm.
I like number three because I feel like this is where you can have some influence. Well, all of them, really. All of them, you can have influence on your co parent. But number three, if you can kind of keep your side of the street clean, maybe, just maybe, it'll start flowing to the other side. And when they hear those comments,
Mhm.
the positive comments about themselves that you're saying to your children, maybe it'll start to rub off.
Yeah. I mean, even myself, like I said, these are tried and true. So I even remember with my youngest daughter using her dad worked for the state highway department. And in the state of Indiana, that required him to plow snow. I always knew what road he was on because he was so good at his job. There's a science behind that, I personally think. But I remember her being in the car with me, and we were on our way to the store. And I said, "Oh, Daddy worked last night." And she said, "How do you know? How do you know he worked last night?" I said, "Well, see this road over here? Yeah. Daddy didn't plow that road. He plowed this one right here. He's so good at his job, and he's so good at keeping the road safe for us." And so that's the planted seed of positivity. I didn't have anything negative to say about him. It didn't matter that he and I didn't make it. What mattered is he wanted to be a good parent to her, and he was a good parent to her. And I needed to let that happen, you know? And so anything that I did that was going to plant a negative seed in her mind was not responsible and not respectful as a
Mm.
co-parent.
Yeah, they're all intertwined, aren't they?
They are all intertwined. It's unbelievable, but they really are all intertwined.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see it work now too, now that I've been instructing for 5 years. It's amazing to see this formula, these 4 formulas work and play out. They did for me, and now I'm trying to share and encourage, others to use them as well. This co-parenting thing isn't about us as parents. We're doing all the hard work, but it's not about us. It's about being able to raise healthy, happy, well-adjusted kids outside of the fact that we've decided to not stay together. So ultimately, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
That must be super rewarding for you to share and then see it succeed with other co-parents.
It is. And my workshop, I do share my personal experience story, and it's very relatable. I have three daughters, and all 3 stories are very relatable. And so, yes, to see it all play out by especially my third story, using this formula parts and other tools that I share in the workshop to have people be able to get a journey that's quite different than what they might be experiencing is very rewarding. I saw a thing just not too long ago, actually, that said, "I made my mess my message." And I'm like, that was relatable to me because that's what I did. That's, why I do what I do. That's why I'm a co-parenting educator, is I made this mess that I had of co-parenting into a flawless situation with my third experience. So yeah, it's not about us though. It is about the kids, and it's about getting them to healthy, happy, well adjusted without creating high conflict in the co-parenting that we're doing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned your third experience?
My youngest daughter and her dad.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So number 4.
Number 4, here we go. Go for the Oscar. So Oscar in my workshop is a 6-inch plastic statue. And it's basically a visual to keep yourself in check. Without the workshop and just saying it, it's a mindset to do all those things, all the formula parts, but it's a mindset to keep yourself in check. And it's like a little reminder. It's like, if you have to put on an act, go for the Oscar, to do things in a way that are not going to affect the kids, and that's what you've got to do. If you have to put on an act to be kosher to your husband or ex and civil to them, then that's what you need to do. So again, it's just a mindset. It's actually been quite popular, and I have workshop attendees that still stay in touch, and they'll send me different things that they're doing to earn their Oscar. So
Yeah, that makes sense to me now where you're saying if you have sometimes you have to fake it till you make it kind of a thing.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
I was like, so does this mean no one could argue you're not doing the first 3 steps because you're playing them so well?
Exactly. So, and that's the key to it too. It really is. It's actually why I do what I do. The reason that I wrote my workshop is because my youngest daughter she called me and in the middle of a hiccup that her and her ex-husband were having. And she said, "I don't want to have this hiccup. This isn't how we want to co-parent. We don't want to do this for our son. We need to figure this little thing out and let's move on." And they did. They were brilliant co-parents. And so they got through their little hiccup. But in that conversation, she said, Mom, I had no idea that you and Dad weren't friends and didn't like each other till I was a grown adult and out of the house. And it was then that I realized, for one, I already knew we were doing good. I already knew we did a good job co-parenting. But I didn't hear it from her, then growing up. And when she said that, I just knew I had a lot of valuable information that I could share with people about how to reach that goal of respectful and responsible co-parenting. Usually when you separate or divorce, that person's not your favorite person. But we didn't sit down and have a plan. We didn't have an expectation set. We didn't set a standard for how we wanted to co-parent. We just did it. We just did it. And it worked well. And obviously she was clueless that we weren't friends. We talked, we discussed, we saw each other at functions, we sat together, we did the bit. We did the bit. She never saw tension. She never saw upset with us. She never saw attitude. She never heard us talk disrespectful to each other. We were both welcomed in each other's homes for drop off and pickup. We were, adaptable and flexible to each other's schedules and holidays and all of that. We just did it because that's what we needed to do for her.
That's amazing. Good for you guys.
Yeah.
And good for her.
Yeah. I'm very proud of that. Very, very proud of that. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So y'all, I found Kari when I was researching co-parenting online, and I found her articles on KPC News. Every one I read, I was like, yes, she nailed it. Where else can people find you online?
I have a Facebook page called Co-Parenting Basics. And that started out in 2018 in January as like a blog I wrote every day for 2 years, Monday through Friday. And then 2 years ago, I guess it was 2 years ago, decided to start doing just little live lessons. And so periodically every other week or every week, I'll go on and just do a little live lesson, about 10 to 15 minutes, a snippet of a reminder of what to do, in co-parenting. And, just encouragement, motivation, inspiration to keep everybody going in the right direction in their co-parenting journey. And so that's Co-Parenting Basics. And then again, the newspaper column is right now, I currently write for the Star in Auburn, Indiana, and I write a weekly column, and it's called Co-Parenting Basics. So sharing the same information that I do right here and that I do in my workshop and on the blog as well.
Yeah, we all need those reminders. I think it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
So great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Links to what Kari and I discussed will be on the show notes. Thank you so much for bringing your insight, energy, and advice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.